Make sure because it's being sent to YouTube. We just want to make sure we have connection. And typical Skeptic podcast. This is a really special episode today. I have with me the son of one of the most infamous people in our industry. I have with me Gareth Icke, the son of David Icke. Together, they're running the site Ickonic, where it's a streaming platform where you can get a lot of good conspiracy. We know it's really conspiracy reality content about what's going on really in the world and like in our state of affairs today. And I'd like to give him a big warm welcome to the show. Gareth, thanks so much for coming on for the first time. How are you, man?
Mate, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to say your dad's been a huge influence on me in like my awakening in my reality. I mean, I saw the Reptilian agenda years ago, and it kind of woke me up to a lot of bigger things, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny actually hearing, other people talking about stuff now that, Dad was talking about in the 90s. And it's funny because it's like, I've just discovered this. And obviously for me, it's kind of quite funny because it's like, well, mate, that was like 30 years ago. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? 30 years ago and being, laughed at in the street and stuff. So, things are changing. I think the world getting as crazy as it is as it has kind of opened a few people's eyes to, COVID particularly, like that whole time, people have kind of gone, actually, maybe the world isn't what I thought it was.
I,
Let
I
me go.
agree. I agree. And I say it seems like they use things like 9/11, things like the thing that happened 4 years ago to like take some of our freedoms away. And then and people don't notice it until I'll give you an example. Like I was out in my town the other night. It was on Saturday night. And I stopped into a gas station and I said to the girl, I said, where is everybody? And she said, because of what happened 4 years ago, she said, not a lot of people are out anymore. A lot of businesses closed, and so, she said a lot of people are staying in. That's not
Yeah.
the world I grew up in. I grew up in
No.
a much, being used, I'm 44 years old. We seem like we're about the same age or about similar age. Like we grew up in a world that was like a lot different, it seems like, or we know it was a lot
Completely,
freer.
mate. Completely. But you know what's funny is like, because I was a personal trainer for a few years before all this kind of stuff happened. And so, when they said 28 days to flatten the curve, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then it was a month, and then it was 2 months or whatever. See, 3 months is a period of time that it takes to create a behavioral change, right? Now, the reason I know that is when I used to work for a company called Virgin Active, they're a major gym company. They used to sell their personal training memberships to clients in 3 month blocks. So you had to do 3 months, right? Because after 3 months you had a behavioral change, so then that person would stick at PT, not every time but most times they'd stick to it and you'd have a long-term client. Now they were doing it obviously as a business model, that was their idea, but in terms of the psychology, it was right. That's how long it takes, 3 months, 90 days, give or take. And so when the 28 days to flatten the curve became 3 months, 4 months, and then we had a little bit of freedom. You released the valve, let people out to the pubs again for a bit, and then they locked everyone down again for another 3 months. It was like I was thinking at the time, I don't think that's a coincidence that this 3 month period of time. And what you did is you created a behavioral change. People got used to drinking at home, staying in, cooking meals at home rather than going out to a restaurant and stuff like that. And so for me, I've got two young kids, so I don't go out partying and clubbing and stuff anymore anyway. But for my friends that are younger or maybe don't have kids, they don't go to the pub anymore. They stay at home. They buy a bottle of wine. They watch things on Netflix or whatever. So, and that's come from lockdown. It's a behavioral change that they just never got out of.
Where do you think that we're headed with that as a society? That can't be good, right? That's not. That's not.
No, it
It's
can't
not
be
good.
good. It can't be good, mate. It stops people interacting as well. Because you know what happens? You go to a pub, you sit opposite someone. Oh, do you mind if I sit there, mate? Yeah, yeah. And you end up sitting next to someone you don't know. You get chatting. You can be from different ends of the political spectrum or whatever, and you kind of tend to get to the end of it where you realize that actually we're both kind of being screwed, aren't we? Like we're both being stitched. And then that then evolves, and then you talk to someone else. You go, "That's interesting. You said that because I spoke to a guy in the pub, and he said the same thing." Whereas if you keep people separate, everyone's in their own little bubble, they're in their own little lives, they focus on what their experience is without realizing that actually, we're all in this together, guys. Like we're all screwed. Unless something happens, unless we get together and stuff. So I think, that's totally intentional. Destroying small business is intentional in the sense that it makes people dependent on corporations and on the government for universal basic income and all this stuff that's coming down the line. but also a lot of it, I think, was about keeping people separate. It was about keeping people out the pub. Because you know what? I don't know if it's the same where you are, but in England, they had the lockdowns right at the start, and people complied in the most part. I mean, I didn't, do you know what I mean? But
Me too.
in the most part, people did, right? They just went along with stuff. I will say not because they were scared of the government or the police, but because they were scared of what the neighbors would say. That's the long and short of it, and not because they were scared of a virus either, in the most part. But then what happened is when they lifted the restrictions and people went out and started chatting in pubs and in restaurants again a little bit, and in beer gardens and stuff like that, and then suddenly going and visiting family that they maybe hadn't visited for 3 months, these conversations happened. And I heard it so many times, like in a supermarket or whatever. Do you know anyone? No, I don't know anyone. No, I don't know anyone either. It's weird, isn't it? In terms of has died of COVID. No, I don't know anyone either. That's weird. And people started to twig that something wasn't right. So then when they brought the lockdowns back in after that summer period, people didn't comply. People
Yeah.
did not comply with it. And so I think they realized then actually, if we're going to get this through the door, we need to stop people mingling. We need to stop people hanging out and having conversations.
One thing they did over here that was really devious was they were doing a thing on the news where they told people if you saw your neighbor doing any type of strange behavior, like if you like this was during the heart of the lockdowns when nobody was supposed to be having any contact. They're like, if you see your neighbor having any contact, like if they have any visitors, you should report them. And I was like, and people were reporting businesses for people, but like businesses that were failing to go against the policy that wanted to stay open because they wanted to stay alive and they didn't want to end up homeless out in the streets, which is
Yeah.
what ended up happening. And I tell people that now because people lost their businesses and they can't, and we wonder why I don't know what it's like over there as far as homeless, but over here it's getting worse and worse. Like it's horrible. It's an epidemic. You know what I mean?
Oh
It's
yeah.
really bad, and I feel like a lot of that came from COVID.
100%. It changed people's brains. Like I genuinely believe that people lost their minds, man. Some lost their minds in sense of the depression from the isolation and the fear of losing their jobs and losing their business and all that kind of stuff, which I totally get. I understand that. But in terms of the psychosis that came as a result of that COVID messaging and all that sort of stuff that was all over the media and things, honestly, mate, like I grew up in punk rock bands, right? In my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, before I tried to rebrand myself as melodic, right? I was all about the punk rock in the early
I
days.
used to love punk too.
Mate, it was all about, damn the man, fuck the system, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But when this COVID stuff happened, mate, right? I had people that I used to play in punk bands with, people I saw doing all sorts of stuff in the old days, damn the system and all that. I saw them tweeting at Tesco's, which is a supermarket brand here, complaining that they'd gone in to this branch at this time and this member of staff wasn't wearing his mask properly. And I'm looking at it going, dude, you were a punk rocker and you are now literally grassing up minimum wage kids to their employers because they didn't have a mask over their nose.
I
Like, do you
know, right?
realize how you're insane? Like, you've lost your mind, man.
It's like when did these people turn into such Karens? Like that's
Oh,
that's what it is. They turn into like a Karen, right? It's like it's hilarious. One thing I wanted to ask you though was what was it like like growing up as David Icke's son? Like was it kind of really cool or like did you get different reactions or like you know what I mean? Like
um,
and
it
were
had its
you
ups
always
and
did
downs.
you always grow up really awake and aware because of that?
I guess so. Do you know what? Like, it started off, if I think back, like people say to me all the time, what was it like? But I don't know any different. Do you know what I mean? So it's a hard one at times to answer that. But when I think about it, when I was a kid, he was at the BBC, he was a sports presenter. People would come up to him, ask for autographs because, days before mobile phones, you wouldn't get selfies and stuff like that. So it was like, popular guy. And then you were cool by association essentially. And then literally like that, it was suddenly abuse being shouted in the street, which as sort of a 9-year-old kid, I'm like, hang on a minute, like what the frick's going on? So then it was quite a lot of abuse and stuff for a long time, and then now, the odd bit of abuse now, but generally it's kind of being vindicated with the world that we live in, um, which is not a cool thing because I would have loved for it to have him actually just been totally wrong and we weren't going to be trying to be thrown into a tyranny. That would have been better. I'd have preferred that, but we are where we are.
Yeah, Gareth, this is my friend Nathan. We do a lot of podcasts together. He's a MILAB, a military abductee, and he's like a whistleblower. But Nate, can you hear us well? Are you there?
Yeah, after 15 minutes of fighting the system, yeah. Hi, Garrett.
Oh, mate. How you doing, mate?
I fine. Man, I've had every problem you can imagine. And when I finally got on your Facebook page, or actually the chat we have open, it wouldn't load. I sent you a picture of it. It took like 4 or 5 minutes, and then I had to refresh and refresh. I finally got to the link. My phone wasn't working. I couldn't connect through Zoom. I mean, this is every podcast now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. One thing I want to say about that, back to what like, the things your dad predicted, it seemed like he was vindicated because everything he said was true. And I noticed there was a turn like around maybe 2015 or maybe a little bit before that where he started doing these really long like lectures. He would go to a conference and he would speak for like 3 hours. And I remember there was a time where I was going through a major like streak of depression. And I think I sat and I listened to all 3 hours of his lecture and it really changed my life. And I just wanted to tell you that it was like, he's had amazing I mean, I'm sure you know this. You probably know this, but he's had amazing. For me, it was very inspirational. You know, I think he's been able to change the minds of a lot of people and put a lot of inspiration in people and wake a lot of people up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, his talks were 10 hours back then, back 2016 time, mate. Honestly, and that wasn't enough. Like, so you'd have like 10 hours, and you'd be going over time by like half an hour. You're like, how is he not collapsing? Like, it's mad. But But it's interesting because obviously he would point out what was going on. My dad's not partisan. He's not left or right. He doesn't have a political affiliation. So he will just call out what's going on. Now, it's an interesting time right now because I'm old enough to remember when everyone knew that, you know, world leaders were selected, not elected. Like that was just common knowledge. That's the way it is. You never trust the government and all that stuff. Doesn't matter who you vote for. Whereas in the last 8 years, like that has taken a massive shift. All of a sudden, like even here in England, where Trump's not our president, but even here, it's become really crazy where this guy can do no wrong. So obviously my dad is doing what my dad always does, which is just call stuff out. And he's been getting, quite a lot of grief over the last, 6-7 months, really, in terms of just saying, look, Trump is not the savior, guys. Trump is not the savior, guys. And even now, where Trump's come in and he's naming his administration and they're all swamp dwellers, pretty much, still getting that same old grief. So it's a weird time at the minute.
Yeah, I think we have to be discerning. I kind of agree. We have to be discerning. I think a lot of people had hope because what Trump was saying, he seemed like he was saying all the right things. And I even got persuaded. Because I guess like a lot of us want that old America back. Like that we miss, like because back to what we originally said, it seems like so many of our freedoms have been taken away. So it's like, how do we get back to that?
He's telling people what they want to hear, which is what's got him elected fundamentally. But having said that, if I had to choose between the two, I narrowly, I think we got a better result by him winning. Because I just think that Harris would have done things faster. I mean, I'm thinking about her and Starmer in England as a coalition. I mean, that doesn't bear thinking about. But I think. What my fear is, mate, is because there's so many people within the alternative realm that are pro-Trump, that it's like, are they going to hold his feet to the fire in the same way they would have held Harris and they held Biden and they held Obama? I sincerely hope so. When he comes into power and he does things that aren't good, that actually these people go, do you know what? I voted for you because I supported you, but actually that's not right. I don't agree with that. As opposed to, kind of looking the other way because it's like, well, I don't want to admit I got it wrong. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing.
The only thing that I've seen that as far as the public being able to push back on any of these politicians, the only thing that I've ever seen was when Obama had the opportunity to bomb Syria and he backed off. That's the only one I can really remember. And that was during, I think, his second term. But it's a little too early yet. He does have some swamp monsters in his cabinet, which is very unfortunate. But
it is, yeah. I mean, it's to me, I see it. I was on a podcast this morning with my mate Rich, and I was saying, it seems to me that what's being built is a war with Iran cabinet. That's what feels like is being built. But then I think, well, actually, for me, all bets are off. Like, if Trump comes into power in January and he is the president and he goes to war with Iran, that won't shock me. But you know what? If something happens between now and January, something happens to Trump and they blame it on Iran, that wouldn't shock me either, mate. I'm at that point with it.
what I think is like,
that
I
may
just
be what's
think,
happening,
yeah,
honestly.
a lot of our tax dollars here in America are going to fund these wars, and I'm sure you know that. Like, a
Same
lot of
here,
our
mate.
tax money is going to either Israel or Ukraine, and it seems like the United States is fighting proxy wars in these countries, and like, I think it's our duty in alternative media to call this shit out because I think we need to fight
100%.
against war. Again, going back to that punk rock attitude, well, and more of like a freedom attitude. Like we don't want to see that. I don't want a world filled with war. No, I can't even imagine a war with Iran. I mean, I don't even want to. I don't even want to be a part of that.
There's no
And if we
winners
can
there,
have
mate.
it,
There's no winners. There's no
yeah,
winners. There's no winners in war anyway. Like they glorify war in the movies, but there's no winners in war at all. My grandfather fought in it, and I've got his medals at home and stuff like that for pulling people out of a burning plane. Like there's not much fun being had by anyone in these situations. And I think people have all this rhetoric, particularly politicians who, by the way, will not be fighting the war themselves. They'll be locked up in a bunker far, far away from the front line. But they have all this rhetoric, and the rhetoric, and they speak so aggressively about other nations that no one speaks about peace. I've not heard any speeches about peace in terms of Ukraine here in the UK. The British politicians, there seems to be no interest in getting anyone around the table. It's just pushing for more and more and more war. It's very frustrating.
What they want to do is integrate Russia into the New World Order, and there's a split in the factions. You have some that lean towards more of a infiltration form of integration, and then you have what they're doing right now, which is the war campaign. So you start this thing in Ukraine going back to, like, I guess it was 2014 when it started, and then you have ISIS, you have all these external forces working against Russia. So that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what's happening. They're surrounding them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the same with Iran. They've been poking Iran with a stick, whether it be through bombings or through sanctions since what 2008, 2009. We're going back way back, and it's just this constant poking in the chest. And I'll be honest, I think the Russians have been, you know,
Mannerly,
they've not.
civilized.
Yeah, to be honest, they've not bitten in a way that perhaps people thought they would.
yeah.
But
And
they
for the
like
people,
them too.
oh, sorry, no, I was going to say the people that don't know, like we're all about the same age. We all grew up in the time we were in our 20s and 30s when the Afghanistan and Iraq wars were going on, and that was George Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, and then on your side of the pond, Tony Blair, and they were all in cahoots. It was like one big war machine. It
One
seemed
big
like.
war machine. One big
It's
war machine.
9/11 party.
Yeah, and throw Netanyahu in there as well because he was egging the whole thing on.
Yeah,
That's I've always I say this as an Englishman. I think that's the axis of evil. I do. I think the United States, the United Kingdom, Israel. I think those three are seriously high up on the creation of chaos
Yeah, they
ladder
fund the
for sure.
terrorists, and then they blame Iran and other countries.
100%.
When it's unfortunately us doing most of it. Plus, we're actually making the motivations out there to get people to fight.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the English are up to their neck in it. People see us as this little island nation, which we are. The Great Britain is a tiny little island. It's a speck on the map, but it seems to have its fingers in everything.
Yeah, well, that's the old empire. So the United States just adopted that system, and so did the rest of the world. To a point, not the whole world. There's a few other systems out there, but that system's at war with those.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. But
Anyway,
I'm not fighting. I ain't fighting anyone.
I just got a question for you. What is it like growing up as David Icke's son and all this controversy, chaos, and fascination?
It's funny. I kind of half answered that a second ago because I was already asked that. But
Oh, he beat me to it. See, they
no,
had
do
to
you know
say
what?
cut me out.
In short, basically, it was a fair bit of stick as a kid. Slightly less so now because of obviously a lot of the things that he said have come to fruition. People look at the world in a different way now, particularly since COVID. But also, 9/11 was a massive red pill moment for a lot of people as well. But do you know what? The main thing I was taught was to question everything. He always said that to us when we were kids, was just to question everything, which didn't go down amazingly well with the teachers when they were telling us stuff. And my hand was literally up for like the whole class. Like,
Right, 'cause
why?
they know
Why?
they know who your dad is. Like, oh God, here he is again.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the end, you'd get to a point where you'd ask why so many times that a teacher would respond with because it is. It's like, well, I'm not sure that cuts it. I'm not sure that cuts it as an explanation. But yeah, that was it really, and that's what I try and teach my own kids. The same, just
I,
question everything,
I
including
got a
me.
good question. The reptilian addenda. I mean, I know you guys probably don't like it but like as far as like me and Nate, like we believe it. We believe that there's like a reptilian elite that controls this planet or something like that. You know, because Nate's a MILAB. Nate's a military whistleblower, abductee. You know, and I interview a lot of people who feel like they've been abducted by aliens, abducted by the military, people who are and say they've been in secret space programs, targeted individuals. You know what I mean? That's like the norm for us. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
not outside of our realm to think that there's some external force that is controlling this world. So I
yeah.
don't see anything wrong with it, you know?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm the same as you. Like, I speak to an awful lot of these people regularly. Unfortunately, God, 90% plus don't want to talk on air about it, which I understand. Like, I get that they're fearful, but we'll have conversations. So this kind of stuff is almost normal to me as well. Not normal in the fact that I accept it, but normal in the fact that I know it goes on. But it's interesting because what you tend to get is pushback on this kind of stuff from religious all kind of religions, to be honest, but they will all sort of push back at it. And it's interesting because actually the stories essentially that are being told by my dad and these people are all in these religious texts anyway. The
It's very,
idea,
very thick irony.
yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? You would say to a Christian would like laugh in your face about stuff, and you say like, what are the demons? What? Well, that's all that's being described, man. Like, you've got different names for it, and Islam has a different name for it, and all these different religions have different names for essentially the same thing. They're kind of telling the same story, which is essentially an extraterrestrial force is manipulating what's going on planet Earth and manipulating humanity, and so there is an irony to actually being dismissed by the people that swear by a book that says exactly that.
I got a really good question for you. Your father has made inroads with what we call surface level truthers. These are people who don't really get into this level of it. Alex Jones is one of them, and I really was impressed that he was able to get through that wall and at least get him to kind of like show some understanding and some interest in it. What do you Has he talked to you about that interaction with them and others in that community, and how much of how far he's gotten in to convince them that there's more actually happening here?
I think at the moment my dad's in a kind of headbutting a brick wall when it comes to that sort of side of stuff because I think a lot of the alternative media has been sucked into left-right politics again.
Yeah.
During the COVID time, I think there was this great togetherness of people where people could see something was going on. They could see there was a war on humanity. They knew that actually this wasn't just about Bill Gates and about making money on vaccines. Actually, this is bigger than this. And then that seems to have then actually regressed a little bit in the last maybe 18 months back into left versus right. If the right get in, that will make everything okay again. And that's annoying because I felt like particularly around about 2022 that we would actually made some real progress in terms of uniting people. Because I think that's the main thing. Like all the time you hear people like, what solutions then? What's the solution? Well, it's a numbers game in my mind. I think the more people that are together, and I don't mean they have to agree on everything. That doesn't matter. We can go back to arguing about stuff tomorrow. That's fine. But at the minute, the war is on all of us. Whether you've got 100 piercings and blue hair or whether you're wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, it makes no odds. Like the cult that is pushing all this dystopia on us and all this net zero and all this crap and all this war, they don't differentiate between us. If you're not in the 1%, which anyone watching this, I'm afraid you're not, then they're coming for you as well.
Yeah. And that,
It's really
go ahead, Nate. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's more or less the fractional 1% because they don't have any respect for those 1%ers unless you get way up at the top. They're very connected. But yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we're working on is uniting the disclosure community because they've infiltrated it. They've turned people against one another. They use remote mind control and just about everything else. And then you have the economic stress, the social stress. You have this, divide on who you're going to vote for and who to support. So you have all of these factors taking place, and they've done a fantastic job of dividing everybody and turning everyone against one another. So we have to unite. We have to work together. We got to put down all the differences and realize they're just illusions. You know, we wear skin suits, and it doesn't matter what color it is. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation, your political orientation, or any of those things. We're cattle on a planet that's a prison, and we need to get ourselves out of it. It starts by waking up. But the first thing is we have to get together, and we have to find common ground. I totally agree with you.
100%. And you know what you're talking about, like infiltration and stuff like that. Like there is so much of that around, and you know, I think about where I live in Derbyshire, right? You've got the Derbyshire coal fields, you've got the Nottinghamshire coal fields. Like these were huge areas of coal mines back in the 1980s. They got destroyed hugely by the government. The Thatcher government destroyed the coal industry and stuff. But there were miners' strikes, right, back in the 1980s. Bearing in mind, these are just miners from coal mines in Nottinghamshire, right? And British intelligence, this is all disclosed now. British intelligence had infiltrated those miners' strikes to create division and create seeds of doubt within those miners, to create factions within, so that they didn't come together and unite against the government, right? And you think, if they're doing that for some miners in Nottinghamshire, England, what are they doing to a global community of truthers and conspiracy theorists and questioners? Yeah, of course, they'll be up to their neck in it in terms of infiltrating it, for sure.
Hey, have you heard anything about the U.S. military and other military factions and private military organizations using negative spiritual entities for reconnaissance, warfare purposes, manipulation, things like that?
Wouldn't shock me in the slightest.
Because we've got some iLabs who have been involved in those types of things. There's one called there's Project Traveler is one of the programs that you know about. And this is where they use my labs as spiritual mediums. And that goes back to a declassified project called Project Penguin. I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but it's basically, they put people on an IV drip with drugs, and they may have used other types of tech. But the goal was to make contact with spiritual beings. And in what's declassified, that I believe they said that they made contact with 9 principal entities, had to do with Egypt. It was like Ra and Horus and 7 others, and that's I think it's on the CIA.gov website, from what I understand, along with some other stuff too that's quite interesting. But they've been involved in this. They've gotten really, really into it, and the ETs are basically chaperoning this thing. So they're going all the way, more or less. There's no stone that isn't overturned and exploited.
Yeah, I think if I don't like using the term like regular people, because that's sort of, I don't mean that in an offensive way. We're all people, but I mean in terms of, like, you know, John that works in the corner shop. If these people knew exactly what was going on and just how deep the rabbit hole goes, it would blow people's minds, and they would see the world completely differently.
It's like a drill hole through the mantle. That's how far it goes. It goes all the way to the core.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was I checked out you and your dad's website, which is Ickonic. If you guys don't know, it's Ickonic.com. It's just like Netflix. It's a streaming service for conspiracy theories, which, you know, and it's not very expensive either. It's very fairly priced, and I noticed you have a lot of different kinds of content on there. Did you want to talk about that a little bit? I'm sure you want to promote that. I thought that was. It looks really interesting. I'm thinking about definitely like signing up. And did you want to talk about maybe some of the different content you guys have on there?
Yeah. So basically, what happened was we were putting content out through YouTube and stuff and other outlets, as everyone else was, and then the censorship just got ridiculous, to the point where, you know, stuff was being shadow banned left, right, and center. It was being banned in different countries. YouTube was deleting stuff, and then 2020 came along, and you know, my brother is far more business minded than me. He was like, you know, I think we should try and start something. And then what happened was then Parler appeared, and it was like, okay, there's a free speech thing. And then Parler, I think they had their servers, I think were Amazon servers. Yeah. And so Amazon pulled the servers, which pulled Parler down. And at that point, it was a case of us looking at each other and saying, look, we need to make sure that there isn't a single percentage of our platform that is dependent on one of these organizations, whether it be Google, whether it be Amazon or whatever, because, you know, it doesn't matter if 99% of your stuff is independent. If 1% of it is controlled by them, they'll just pull it down. That's how it works. So we're now at a point where we've got a completely independent platform. It's completely separate from all of that, you know, down to the servers, down to even the streaming software. Everything is completely in-house. And so it was crazy because we launched in November 2019. And then the world just happened to go mad at that point. And so we were in a position where our idea was to start really slowly, organically, a couple of weekly shows, and then maybe we'll make documentaries here and there, and and then obviously the COVID nonsense happened, and everyone, to be fair, I think naturally thought the mainstream media is talking nonsense. And at that same point, we all got kicked off of social media. Dad's YouTube channel and all that stuff was all deleted. So all of a sudden, all eyes were on what we were doing. And so we just basically expanded on the fly and just started making more and more stuff and getting more and more stuff out there. And so we're at a point now where, we've got multiple weekly shows, documentaries, films, tens of thousands of hours worth of material. And we're looking to expand even more next year. I'm coming in full time from now, basically, which I wasn't before. Like, I was providing content, like a weekly show here and there, and another documentary here and there. But apart from that, I wasn't. Whereas now I'm in full time. So we're going to be launching live shows as well, just to be able to react to stuff as it happens. Because I think 2025 is going to be a really important year in terms of either pushing this horror show forward or people pushing back against it.
Yeah, I hope it's the latter. And what do you think of the situation with Elon Musk? Because that's another savior figure, and he's a problematic one. And I go by research and intuition, and my intuition has been, just letting me know that I think that he has his heart in the right place in some areas. He's not fully conscious of what he's doing, but he's being used to create the Neuralink stuff, to connect us into the hive mind. And other things too. So he's being basically like a useful tool. And the Future Forecaster group, which is a remote viewing group, remote viewed him, and they did an analysis of his psyche. What they found is the exact same thing. He's being used for something. He's not fully aware of it. What is your opinion on that? And your dad's, of course.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one because my dad's been calling him out for a long, long time, like way before he bought Twitter and all that kind of stuff. And to be fair, the whole alternative was calling him out. He's the brain chip guy. Right. And so for people that have been warning about the fact that they want a microchip population and stuff for decades, the brain chip guy is not a good guy. And then suddenly he bought Twitter and he allowed people to call blue-haired people idiots for a bit, and people quite enjoyed that. And so he suddenly became a savior. And it's quite strange for me to look at the alternative media, including InfoWars and these other organizations that were calling out microchipping 20, 30 years ago, that are now celebrating the chip brain guy getting into the administration of the United States. It's one hell of a flip.
Right.
So yeah, I'm very wary of him, because as far as I'm concerned, like, I don't know the deeper level of it in terms of whether he knows what he's doing or not. Only he can tell you that. Fundamentally, I don't know. But whether he knows it or not, he's taken us down a dark path, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And everyone is putting this faith in him. Like, this is the guy that's going to carry us through. Alex Jones as well. Everybody's on board with this. And, I just hope they have some common sense left.
So do I, mate. I mean, this is a guy that said, his own words. He said that artificial intelligence could be the end of humanity.
Right, so let's merge with it, and then it becomes the controller of humanity, which is the problem. As far as you go out in space, you're going to find the same thing. AI is the enemy. It's the control system.
Exactly. So those I say that to people that are, pushing him. I'm like, mate, square that circle for me. That you've got someone saying it could be the end of humanity, which I agree with, but then pushing it anyway.
And then you have all the symbolism too that floats around on Facebook and stuff like that with his mother, the all seeing eye symbols, the occult imagery and stuff
Mars
like
outfit, that. All that stuff, the obsession with Mars. Yeah, for sure, mate.
So, we know where he comes from. We know what they want to do with him, and they'll likely succeed without him being fully aware of it until it's too late. Or maybe even he may even flip, or maybe this whole thing just may be a ruse to start from start to finish, and he's aware of it. But it appears that he's not fully aware of it. And that would be the best way, if you're going to do something like that, is to take somebody and who has some empathy, who has some humanity left, and completely fool them to serving the system, but yet they appear to be the person that people want on the outside.
Yeah, exactly. But time will tell on that one. Time will tell on that one, mate.
Yes, because it could always go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, next year is going to be an interesting year, mate. Like whatever happens between now and January, whether something happens to Trump, whether Trump gets in, either way, I think you know it's going to be the chaos that they're going to want to bring the order out of. I think next year is a big one.
I got to ask you this: did you guys have an opinion on the assassination attempts? Because what was interesting was they happened in my hometown. It was weird. Like I left that day for a conference. I left Pittsburgh for a conference in Florida, and then I was on the road, and it happened. I heard that it happened, and the town that it happened was like 30 miles from my house or something. And I was like, wow, it was Butler, Pennsylvania, where they supposedly let some guy get up on the roof and like it was weird how this guy just had free range to the roof for such a long time. There was a lot of weird stuff about it. Like, did you guys
Yeah.
look into that? And do you guys have any opinion on it? There was two, I guess, assassination attempts. You know,
I mean, for me, I think, yeah, the guy was obviously allowed to get up there. All that stuff was allowed to happen for sure. But at the same time, I think if they wanted to assassinate Donald Trump, they wouldn't have left it to some, greasy haired kid on a roof. You would have blamed it on the kid for sure. But I think you would have had, a professional sniper take him out, and that would have been the end of that. Blame it on the kid and whatever. So the fact that that didn't happen, I don't know. I mean, my attitude is if they didn't want Donald Trump to be president, he wouldn't be.
yeah, and one thing that is like we know from the JFK assassination, right? Like if you look back at the JFK assassination, they said there was multiple shots fired at JFK. Like they wanted him taken out so bad that the CIA, well, I guess we could say the CIA did it now. I mean, they still won't declassify the files, which I find interesting. That it's been 80 years, and they still won't declassify the files, which makes me feel like the CIA was definitely implicated to some degree. But then also, so that makes me think if they really wanted Trump dead, then they could have easily done it, right? It's just kind of backing up what you said. That has to make people raise an eyebrow. And we're not the only people that are questioning it. There's a lot of hardcore conspiracy theorists that question Trump, even here in the United States, where it seems like there's a heavy Trump alliance. And I'll admit that I even got swayed. I voted for Trump. I did because I felt like he was going to do the right thing. I don't know. I have hope, right? But like I agree with what you said. Like, if they didn't want him in power, there's people that control this world, right? It seems like, and I've always told people that the president's just a figurehead. Like, like if whoever's controlling this world, they pick the people they want in, and like, and it was funny. I had an ex UFC fighter on my show the other day, and he said something about like they gave him the King of Jerusalem or something like some kind of esoteric occult ceremony or something like that with the assassination or something like that. I can't remember exactly the way he explained it, but it was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think, with Trump, if they, like I said, if they didn't want him in, they wouldn't have him in, and they, they didn't want him in 2020, did they? It was the most obvious rigged election in history. I mean, I have no skin in the game either way, because I don't have a political affiliation. But even I was looking at that, going, "There's no way Biden won that. The guy can't string a sentence together." Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, when the
insane.
FBI director said this is the cleanest election we've had, it's not.
No,
It's
I
the
mean,
opposite.
how many dead people got down the polling station to vote that day? It's unbelievable, mate.
I have some grandparents who voted. I'm certain of that. I'm not visiting their graves anymore. I wonder if they have like a touchscreen in a casket. They got it all wired up.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
Dem-
the dead. I also have a saying too: when there's no more room in hell, the dead will rise and vote for the World Economic Forum candidates.
Yeah, when they just. When
What,
they
what
just.
does your dad think of George Soros? Does he agree with Alex Jones that George Soros is basically like the devil incarnate and everything? Or
Yeah, I mean, all these people are. They come in on different sides of the fence. You'll have the ones coming in on the left and the ones coming in on the right, but they're ultimately working for the same team. Because if you go above that left right stuff, I mean, I think left and right is just for us. Like that's for the theatre, for the general public to choose between. Once you go above that, there is no left and right. It's just one unified group. And they all just play different roles. Bill Gates will play his role. Schwab plays his role in it. Soros will play his role. But Buffett will play. Warren Buffett will play his role. And in the end of the day, they're all batting for the same team, and it's team, not humanity.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I say that's why we need to be organized, because it seems like the controllers, whoever control this world, whether it's reptilian or extraterrestrial or the even the political figures and the deep military factions are in charge. They're very organized and they're very strategic, and they know how to divide us and they know how to conquer. And if we can be a little bit more better the way we do things, I think we could have a. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree completely. I think that's the thing that has let our side, for want of a better term, down is the lack of unity and the lack of organization. You know, the early days of COVID, as an example, because it's fresh in the mind. You know, they were so organized with everything that they had and all their messaging, and everyone was on point, and we were in absolute chaos. You know, we were running around trying to put out fires left, right, and center. There wasn't much organization because no one really knew what was going on. And then, you know, by the time it got to mid to late 2021, the alternative, the pushbackers, they had their shit together, and you know, and these protests were enormous, hundreds of thousands of people. People were standing up, and suddenly the COVID tyranny collapsed to a certain degree, to a large degree, certainly in Europe, and the lockdowns were all pulled, and the vaccine mandates were pulled, and all this kind of stuff. And it was frustrating that it took 18 months to 2 years for us to become organized enough to actually push back properly, you know. And that's what I think is so important, that we have a unity amongst us where we can respect each other's beliefs. We don't all have to get on about everything, because that would be a hella boring world if we all agreed on everything anyway. But for the fundamentals in terms of, you know, freedom, fuel security, food security, protecting the children, you know, you can have a list of things that we all have in common, because it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, or anything, or what color skin you are, or whatever. If you got kids, and you want to protect them, so you go, okay, so we're all in that together, so that's something we all have in common. Okay, right, well, let's unite around that one. Right, what else we got in common? Right, we got this in common, blah blah. Right, okay, do you want to die on a battlefield for a government that hates you? Not really. No, neither do I. Right, we got that in common. And so in the end, you're going to have a long list of things that you're like, you know, you'll probably have a few things that you don't get on about, but the fundamentals, the real meat and potatoes, the things that matter, we'll all be aligned with. And let's just focus on them.
Yeah, they want us to scream the talking points of the mainstream media, but what we really need to do is we need to talk sanity with each other, and we need to touch people's hearts. We need to find what's left in their heart, and we need to pull it out, and we need to connect it back to the world so that they feel that they have a shared interest again. Because I think just people get disenchanted. They don't want to plug in, they don't want to do anything, and they feel they can't do anything. And there's plenty of people doing that.
Oh, a hell of a lot of people feel like that, mate.
I wanted to ask you something, just shifting off to another exciting topic here. The Saturn Moon Matrix that came out in, I think, 2007 or 2008. I know the YouTube video that's still kind of floating out there is, I think, 20 or 2008. That was groundbreaking. And I wanted to ask you, after I saw that, it was years later, it was probably around 2016, when my experiences started to reveal a consciousness matrix at work here. And I owe the credit to your dad, because that kind of set me in that direction. But it wasn't until, you know, because I have handlers, you know, V2K, they use, you know, microwave transmissions, and they were masquerading as ETs at the time. And there's a whole story there, but that's where I got some of that information from. But your father laid the foundation. I just want to know where he got that at, if you know the origins of it. Because, I mean, he really touched on something that was fundamental to understanding this entire matrix. I mean, and that's been remote viewed too. The Farsight Institute has remote viewed it. They found where the mainframe computer system is inside of Saturn. It's a levitating structure. You have the artificial rings. We have the Cassini pictures. Your father talked about a reflective material that's being dispersed in the rings. You have the six-sided storm at the North Pole, and that appears to be, and your father pointed that out in a magnificent way, that frequency can create geometric patterns. So it's creating an atmospheric anomaly, and it's sending out a frequency. It's basically like taking a giant planet like that and turning it into a satellite dish or a broadcasting station, and it's drowning out everything and limiting us to five senses. How did he get that? You know, if you know, please enlighten us.
I mean, I don't know 100%. I know that he traveled, you know, before he was banned from the world. Basically, he traveled in, you know, extensively to multiple countries, was meeting with multiple people and whistleblowers and stuff. I know he reads a ridiculous amount. So if you go to his house, it's literally just like a freaking library. So I know one of the books that he was focusing on was one that was literally called "Who Built the Moon," which had lots of NASA test dummies and things like that, and stuff to do with the moon. Um, I'm trying to think of the title of the book that's to do with Saturn now, and I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Ringmakers of Saturn.
Do you know what? It might have been.
Yeah, that's
That
Saul
does.
the Cassini pictures and the
Yeah, that rings
former
a bell,
NASA
mate. Yeah,
scientists.
because I know he's
He showed
mentioned that in his
excerpts,
talk.
or he showed excerpts of that when he did his the Saturn moon matrix.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that was one of them, absolutely. But he doesn't get his stuff from sort of one or two sources. So there would be a bucket load of different.
And I'm pretty sure there's some intuitive information coming in there too. He talks about that as well, because it couldn't possibly be anything else. We're all waking up, at least some of us are, the ones that are sensitive to these things.
Yeah, yeah.
Your father's been on the cutting edge of it, man. I have to give him all the credit in the world for taking all of that flack, all of that humiliation, because in the early days, he was really looked down upon and laughed at. I mean, it was ridiculous. And we all go through that kind of wonky awakening where we're confused. And he did it publicly. I mean, incredible. He's an incredible person. I have to give it to him. He's very, very courageous, and he blazed the trail for so many other people.
And can I just say, like, I still watch the Reptilian Agenda to this day. I have it on a playlist, and I loved Credo Mutwa, that guy he met with in Africa, the African shaman. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what gave him like the insight to want to go and talk to Credo, and they talk for 6 hours, and it's amazing. And they talk about so much stuff about like the British colonization. It's not just about reptilians. Like if you look into the documentary, I'm sure you guys know this. Like they talk about the British colonization of Africa and how the reptilians could have been tied into that. It was very, very interesting, very groundbreaking for the time. I mean, super groundbreaking. Like nothing like it had been done before, And I would recommend anybody to go watch that hasn't seen it. It's called The Reptilian Agenda. David Icke, Credo Mutwa, rest in peace. He died. Was your dad close to Credo? But besides, do you remember? Did they talk like after that and stuff?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They had a lot of contact. I remember when I was young, when I was a kid.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah, dad always, well, still does speak extremely highly of him.
That's amazing. Yeah. But I know you only had an hour. I didn't have any questions. Is there anything else you wanted to tell the audience or finish up with today? And I hope this interview doesn't get taken down. I'm going to leave it up on YouTube for a little bit because I think people need to see it. But I'll probably put it on Rumble too. But and if you want a copy of the interview, I'll send it to you. But
That'd be
is there
great.
is there anything you wanted to leave the audience with today?
Oh man, I don't know really. To be honest, I think in terms of YouTube, we've not been that spicy. Have we? We've not talked about too much that's too spicy for them to get freaked out by. It should be okay. All I would say to people is just to question everything, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just think, like, for the next sort of 6 months, I think things are going to be kind of crazy, and so you're going to get lots of different things from lots of different angles. You're going to get lots of misinformation. You're going to get lots of real information about what's going on, and I just think it's important that people kind of, listen to their hearts a little bit as well, and actually kind of does what I'm being told feel right? And if the answer is no, then maybe have a deeper look at it, because I think that they're going to try and manufacture a lot of consent in the next 6 months for a lot of things, whether that be a war with Iran, whether that be an escalation in Ukraine, whether that be bringing in even more net zero measures and stuff like that. Like here in the UK, they're attacking the farmers massively. There's some huge protests in the UK on Saturday from farmers and stuff. So there's a lot going on at the minute. So I just think people need to be, streetwise and see what's what before they kind of jump to conclusions and perhaps react in a way that isn't right. And what I mean by that is, as an example, for here, you had some stabbings in Southport, which is just outside Liverpool, and it was stabbings of children, and so therefore the understandable anger as a result of that led to riots on the street and people fighting with the police and all this kind of stuff. And I think, if you take a step back from that and you go, right, who gains from me rioting in the street? I don't gain from it. The victims aren't brought back, but the establishment of martial law and a police state, that does win. Do you know what I mean? And so that's all I would say, is just to, be aware of what's going to happen in the next few months and try and keep your head as much as possible, which isn't always easy. But I'm sure we're going to be tested, that's for sure.
Yeah, the first 6 months is going to show a fair amount of things. I think the first week is going to show some things.
Yeah, 100%, mate. 100%.
They're already talking about, I mean, one proposal was to end the Fed or audit the Fed. I was really enthusiastic about that, but I know that that's going against a monstrous machine, and it's doubtful it'll take place. And there's a lot of things that have been proposed that sound good. Some things are kind of like new territory, like, you know, getting rid of the income tax to a certain extent, and then just, you know, using other sources of revenue. But I don't know. I think we're headed into an economic collapse, like a real Great Depression, worse than the first one. And I think that's what they're going to do. And I think they're looking for either a war or an assassination of Trump, something like that. Something is going to happen. And if it doesn't, then we got lucky, because it certainly feels that way. Because if he gets in there and he starts to do things that they don't like, and it's a fundamental change, which is what some of these proposals are, and they're successful, and we get what we are asking for, they're going to respond, and they're going to respond in a serious way. And it wouldn't take much to bring this economy down. You stop the quantitative easing, or just have an event and you trigger it. And now you've got everybody, you know, everyone is in a situation where they can't get food properly. They can't pay, you know, they can't pay their bills. And now they got to look to government for solutions when they've caused it. Yeah. There you go. The problem action's
a solution. Like your dad said, problem, action, solution.
Yeah, that's the thing. You know, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. They want to create a situation where people almost ask for that, you know.
Yeah, we need to have a shirt that says that, and the red underneath that says bullshit.
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to tell everybody, Dave? Do you want to go first? Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you? And thank you guys for doing this. And then Gareth can go.
Hey, if you can hang out for like 2 minutes after this, I just want to ask you something. Is that cool, Gareth? I mean,
yeah, sure, mate. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I have to stop the Zoom because I've just tried to stop it before, and it keeps recording. So it might record the private conversation. So I have to get off Zoom. So I can give you his email. You know, because it might record the private conversation.
Drop me an email, mate.
You know what'll happen? No, if we don't do it the way he suggests, it'll probably be broadcasted all over the internet, you know, by the NSA. So, you know, when they want it to work, it works. But, you know, fantastic. When they don't want it to work, it won't work at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, drop me an email, mate. No problem.
I'll give him your email, Nate. And Nate, do you guys want to tell people where to find you and stuff? Nate, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm on the Disclosure Now channel on Wednesday nights. That's the Virtual Temple Complex. I've got a new podcast coming up probably this week, as soon as I can get these, you know, issues with my laptop cleared up, because that's my other computer problem. It always happens at the same time. Both computers go down at the same time. You know, it's like every single time now. It's like 3 in a row, and it's like, and plus my phone. So you can catch me all at those places. Facebook, just look up my name, Nathan Sizik. You can go to Rob's, any one of Rob's social media platforms. You can find me there, or Hajan, contact D at voicesoforion.com, and the Planetary Consciousness Project, and Rob's Telegram group. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah. And Gareth, thank you so much for doing this and taking your time.
Mate, pleasure, mate.
How can we find you?
Shows are on Ickonic.com, or I'm on Twitter, just under my, or X, whatever it's called, under my name, Gareth Icke. And there's a Telegram as well, which is Gareth Icke Tonight.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, well, thank you guys, and until next time, everybody, and thank you guys, and have a good night, everybody.